Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's one of the many chemicals that transmit signals between neurons, also known as brain cells. These signals are called neurotransmitters, and they control our thoughts and actions. Dopamine is associated with reward-motivated behavior. It's a chemical that motivates you to take action to achieve rewards or avoid negative consequences. Let's take a look at how neuroscientists discover how dopamine works in your brain, what its functions are, and how you can control your dopamine levels for happiness. What is dopamine? Dopamine is one of the most important neurotransmitters in the human brain. Dopamine is also sometimes referred to as the pleasure chemical. Dopamine is released by neurons in the brain that are associated with pleasurable experiences. These neurons are also activated when we expect rewards. Dopamine is released in anticipation of pleasurable experiences, and it is also released after we get what we want. It is important to note that dopamine is not responsible for joy or happiness. It is responsible for the anticipation of pleasure. Dopamine is produced in the reward pathway of the brain. Neuroscientists call this the mesolimbic pathway. The reward pathway of the brain is associated with positive feelings such as pleasure and motivation. The reward pathway of the brain is largely influenced by our genetics. Dopamine functions. The reward pathway of the brain has two components, the go pathway and the no-go pathway. The go pathway is associated with positive feelings we have when we achieve a reward. The no-go pathway is associated with negative feelings we have when we experience a negative consequence. The dopamine pathway is involved in both the go and no-go pathways of the reward pathway. It is also involved in many other things. The dopamine pathway is associated with approach-motivated behavior. Approach-motivated behavior is when we take action to achieve rewards and avoid negative consequences. The dopamine pathway also is associated with movement and energy. This pathway also plays a role in pattern recognition and novelty. The dopamine pathway also plays a role in self-awareness and visual imagery. How to increase your dopamine levels? 1. Exercise is perhaps the best way to increase dopamine levels. Exercising, especially aerobic exercise, releases dopamine and serotonin. Both serotonin and dopamine are important neurotransmitters. They have important functions in the brain and are essential for happiness. Dopamine is associated with reward-motivated behavior. It's a chemical that motivates you to take action to achieve rewards or avoid negative consequences. When you exercise regularly, you create a consistent release of dopamine. Exercise has been clinically shown to improve mood and reduce anxiety. Exercise also releases endorphins. Endorphins are chemicals that reduce pain and make you feel happy. 2. Eating healthy is another way to increase dopamine levels. Eating healthy foods loaded with nutrients and vitamins can improve your mood and reduce anxiety. Eating unhealthy foods high in sugars and fats can have the opposite effect. 3. Take certain supplements. There are a variety of supplements that can increase dopamine levels. L-tyrosine, vitamin B, and fish oil are a few examples of supplements that can increase dopamine levels. The best way to increase dopamine levels is by eating healthy and exercising regularly. How to decrease your dopamine levels? 1. Meditation is one of the most effective ways to decrease dopamine levels. Meditation has been shown to decrease anxiety and improve mood. 2. Neurofeedback is another way to decrease dopamine levels. Neurofeedback is a type of therapy that trains your brain to release less dopamine. Neurofeedback is especially useful for treating anxiety disorders due to high dopamine levels. 3. Avoid risky behaviors. Risky behaviors such as gambling, addiction, and spending too much money can increase your dopamine levels. All of these risky behaviors can result in short-term dopamine spikes, but over time these spikes can cause an increase in your dopamine levels. When dopamine levels are too high, it can cause problems. It can make it harder to focus, and it can make you feel anxious. Excessive dopamine can also cause you to be less creative. 4. Avoid certain stimulants. Certain stimulants can increase dopamine levels. Caffeine, sugar, and nicotine are a few examples of substances that increase dopamine levels. Conclusion: dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is involved in many different functions in our brain. If your dopamine levels are too high, you can reduce them by avoiding risky behaviors and avoiding certain stimulants. Dopamine is one of the most important neurotransmitters in the human brain, and it is very important to learn how to control it.